let's start with Julien Dijol, Policy Director from Housing Europe. He is Head of Policy and Deputy Secretary General at Housing Europe, to be precise, a social and political scientist by education. He has been trained at the Institute of Political Studies in Bordeaux, at the University of Stuttgart, and Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium. And his role is particular in Housing Europe because he ensures that advocacy work can pick up the results of the project work they have been doing, in particular in the field of cohesion policy and social inclusion, as well as several other issues. What we are really interested to hear about is the minimum energy performance standards that is included in the recast, the proposal of the recast Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Julien.
Hi.
Eva? Your microphone, I would say.
Okay, it works for you. Hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for the nice introduction, and thank you everyone for inviting me to share our perspective. While I'm sharing the screen, I'm just wanted to make a note of caution. What I'm going to talk about is valid. I mean, is the point of view of social, cooperative, and public housing. And as you know, we are only 11% the total housing stock in Europe. So what I'm going to present is valid for this segment and not necessarily for the wider housing market. And therefore, it's important that we are cautious about not drawing general conclusions. And it's also challenging because it also means that a policy measure addressing the whole housing sector is not necessarily going to function in the same way in the social housing sector and in other segments. So that was the note of caution to start the presentation. And please, if there's an issue, a technical issue, please do not hesitate to interrupt me if you don't hear or something, or if I'm freezing. You know, sometimes connection is not perfect. So what I wanted to start with is just an explanation of the specific approach of social housing as compared to other segments of the housing market. Social housing is really trying to combine three elements at the same time. Affordability, so I mean, you know what it means, so the ability to meet the demand, but within the limit of the financial means of the people. Availability, which means that we need to keep up with the demand in a quantitative way, so we need to produce new buildings as well, and sustainability, which is indeed meeting this demand, but within the limit of the planet, basically. And reaching the three objectives at the same time proved to be very challenging. And to be honest, I think from what we see that in the private market, it's almost impossible to reach the three at the same time. I mean, you have to choose one of the three at the expense of the other. So we are really in a kind of trilemma situation. But in the social housing sector, what we try to do, because of the public support that we get, we try to do the three at the same time. So we are really talking about a balancing act between these different points, and everything related to the regulation or to external factor can have an impact on this, you know, delicate balance that we are trying to reach. Sorry, I'm trying to pass this next slide, but it proves to be a bit slow. All right, hold on. All right, why is it not working?
If you click on the bottom of the slide, yeah,
I will go the old-fashioned way, you know, escape and trying to do that. So, as I said, some external factors can have a very strong impact on this delicate balance that we're trying to reach. And of course, the cost of living crisis that we are, you know, experiencing at the moment is typically one of those external factors, exogenous, as we may say. as you know very well about that, and we've been discussing that in the introduction. We have here a graph on the left side about the cost of material. Actually, this statistic coming from Eurostat stops at June 2021. So you can imagine that we are let's say, on the same trend currently. So that's indeed challenging. And the second point, second graph coming from the IMF, is really about the cost of living increase from high energy prices in percentage of the total household spending. And you see the comparison between the 20% richest and 20% poorest households. And you see in some countries huge challenges in this regard. So we are really in the middle of the cost of living crisis, which is something that will make it more difficult to reach the balance between the three elements I mentioned earlier. Another illustration of this cost of living crisis is a survey we've made recently among our members in Germany, whereby the result of the survey is quite striking. They say basically that almost 2/3 of the companies, socially oriented companies in Germany, have to postpone new construction projects. And almost a quarter of them has been forced to abandon the planned construction project. And this is roughly the same figures for renovation. 2/3 of the companies have to put a climate-friendly conversion of their flats on hold. What they mean climate-friendly conversion, it's basically renovation, and they put as well in it the age-appropriate conversion. So as you may know, in the social housing sector, when we do renovation, we do not only look at carbon or CO2, but a wider range of issues, including the adaptation to an aging population. So it's quite striking, and of course it's worrying, because at the very moment where we're supposed to accelerate on decarbonization, things are slowing down because of those external factors. And despite that, the good news is that before this, we were on a rather positive trend. This is a figure coming from a report made in France, so I'm sorry, it's in French, about comparing the different decarbonization trend in 6 countries. This is about the energy consumption, so per square meter. The other one is about the CO2 emissions per square meter. And I just wanted to pause for a moment on this one, because basically it shows that all countries, regardless of the policy mix that they had in place, and even before the next generation of EPC, they were all embarked on a somehow decarbonization process as well. And you can see the lowest, the lowest line, how Sweden features. It's quite remarkable that they've, in a sense, managed to almost decarbonize their building stock, mixing different measures like energy efficiency measures, but also, of course, the decarbonization of heat, thanks to almost decarbonized electricity, but also heating systems. So I think the point here is to see that decarbonization has already started. Actually, if you look at the recent EEA statistic on buildings, clearly we see the historical trend of decarbonization in the building stock is underway. Now, the threat, the external factors I mentioned before, war and COVID and so on, are going to slow down this process. And therefore, this is very important to find policy measures that will help avoiding this slowing down. And here comes the question about minimum energy performance standards and the new EPC. And I wanted to focus on 2 examples of MEPs in practice. First of all, in France, actually, this is the inspiration for the European Commission in their proposal was actually France. So you have there now in place a law which gradually bans the rental of the worst performing housing units. You see the timeline here, and this applies to new or renewed rental contracts. So it doesn't apply when you are in the middle of your rental contract, but it will apply if you renew or if you have a basically a new tenant. So this is really the typical way of phasing out the worst performing segment with some deadlines and some strict rules, which, for instance, forbid the increase of the rent for the worst performing ones, so EPCG housing units. For instance, already at the moment, it's impossible to increase the rent if you are a landlord, if you have tenants in this place. So what does it mean, basically, phasing out EPC, EFG, for instance, the case of France? You see on the left side, the percentage, what it does represent. So 7% under G, 10% under F, 22% under E. So you can see about, let's say, the magnitude of the challenge. And you can see also on the right side, that's for the general housing stock, and you see on the right side the comparison between the different tenure, including the social housing tenure, which is the blue bar, the green bars. The green bars are the social housing tenants, social housing segments, whether they are in an apartment or in a single house. So you see, indeed, this is another point to be very clear about, is that the social housing sector is well ahead in terms of energy performance, and therefore in terms of the number of housing units that have to be treated under this new legislation. And yet, this will be challenging for the French social housing movement. It will represent an increase of the renovation rate to about 2.3 or 2.6% of the housing stock, coming from a 1.3% currently. So it's almost doubling of the renovation rate. And so, which of course is a challenge in terms of mobilizing, the supply chain, and also in terms of cost. The assumption is that it will cost around 50 to 60,000 euro per renovation, knowing that only 50 to 60% of this cost relates to work related to energy. There are other things that need to be done, as I mentioned before, for Germany. You cannot separate those different elements. And the ambition when you do this renovation, because you have to do it, because otherwise it will be not possible to rent it again, the ambition is to reach, of course, a certain number of EPC class, but not all of them at the same level. The expectation, looking at the technical aspect and the budget available, the expectation is that 60% of those renovations will be achieving EPC level C, 27 will be about EPC label B, and 13% EPC level D. So you see a variety of end outcome depending on the technical situation, on the availability of renewable energy resources, for instance, and on the budget available. Now, another way to approach is in the Netherlands. The Dutch social housing sector has committed. So I mentioned committed because it has not been put into proper legislation, but it's an agreement between the government and the social housing sector, committed to phase out all EFG homes by 2028. And on top of that, what they want to do is to bring those homes into what they call future-ready standards. Future-ready standards means a lot of things. It's basically the fact that you may have a proper installation so that you can have low-temperature heating system. And this has to be done without increasing the rent. So, which is obviously also challenging. But this is the goal and the expectation. An important point here about the Dutch insulation standard is that you have, I'm not going to go into the detail here, but is that there's what we call a safeguard clause, so which is a flexibility mechanism which is given in case of exceptional circumstances, like the one we are living at the moment. And actually the Dutch social housing organization are now really discussing with the government, say, okay, we are in a situation where this is going to be very complicated to reach the target because of the external factors. So we need a bit more flexibility. But it's interesting to see that yes, there's a phasing out on a, let's say, voluntary basis, but also mentioning of this insulation standard, the proper combination between energy efficiency and renewable energy, which doesn't necessarily mean a specific EPC class. I mean, you can have an adequate insulation standard at the level B, in some case level C, and therefore it depends on this optimal combination of I mean, ideally renewable energy sources and insulation strategies. Yeah, I mean, this was a study that we commissioned to the Copenhagen Economics, which again clearly remind us of this economic reality that beyond a certain point, cost exceeds savings. It depends again on the countries, but this is why the Dutch government has not set a strict standard in terms of what is the insulation for renovation or existing buildings, but rather looking at also the cost effectiveness and where you have this optimal situation between energy efficiency, renewable energy, and the cost effectiveness as well. So basically, some of the conclusion I'd like to draw, and I'm really happy to discuss with you about that. First of all, energy performance certificates in the past, so even before the next generation EPC, have been an important tools to help housing providers taking decisions related to renovation. And we've seen decarbonization trend underway. This is specifically true in the social housing sector. So that's been very useful because indeed you have a clear view of what's the performance of your stock. And energy performance certificates are certainly necessary to enforce measures such as the phasing out of the worst performing segment. That is an obvious point. I mean, you need to have an indicator in order to enforce the legislation. But we have to be cautious on different points. First of all, we need a kind of stability about the EPC calculation. And one of the things that was a bit complicated for the social housing sector is to understand that the rationale behind the proposal of the European Commission to change the scale, to redefine EPC classes not in terms of numerical value, but in terms of relative value, which is obviously an issue because you will penalize the countries that have already decarbonize massively their building stock, like Sweden, but also because some countries like France have just revised their EPC system, and it would prove a bit like a blocking or quite deterrent for them if they had to wait for the new methodology to be in place before embarking with the renovation wave that is absolutely needed. So we have to be cautious not to mix the different points in the discussion. The next generation of EPC is absolutely needed, but we need something which is stable, and we don't need necessarily the maps to be completely related to a new rescaling of the EPC. It could have unintended negative consequences, in fact. So that's something we really need to be careful about. Almost I'm coming to the end. One also important message is that we have not found any correlation between a specific approach on maps or a specific method related to EPC and the decarbonization trends. I've shown you the decarbonization trends from different countries, and so it's very complicated to find any correlation between a specific policy and the result on the ground. I mean, we know what are the key ingredients, but it's not necessarily related to the introduction of or not of MEPS or a new EPC methodology. And lastly, it's also obvious, but it's important to remind everyone that renovation in the social housing sector are driven by multiple factors, not only by the legislation, but also by the social acceptance of residents, by the availability of resources in terms of skills, but also renewable energy potential, and by, of course, the financial situation, the budget that is available per renovation or per housing units, for instance. So all this is I think the message is that what can be true in one segment of the housing market is not necessarily true in another segment. So we need to be really cautious in having something that will work everywhere. And this is why we hope that the new EPC will be transparent, but also stable, and will be based on clear numerical value and not only a relative approach in terms of percentage of the housing stock. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm happy to have a discussion with you. Thank you very much.